And now, from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It is Thursday, March 25th. My name is Kyle Kondik. I'm the managing editor of Sabados Crystal Ball here at the UVA Center for Politics. I'm also one of the editors of our new book on the 2020 election called A Return to Normalcy, the 2020 election that almost broke America. It's important to note that there's a question mark at the end of a return to normalcy, because I think it's very much a kind of an open question as to what sort of political era we're heading into. The term a return to normalcy was made famous by Warren Harding's 1920 presidential campaign, which sort of promised going back to normal after World War I and a lot of other disruption during that part of our history. And a century later in 2020, I think Joe Biden kind of ran with sort of the same premise in his campaign, and it sort of remains to be seen whether he will actually be able to deliver on that normalcy. And different people have different ideas about what, quote, normal really is in American politics and whether it's truly worth returning to or not. The book itself is available for pre-order now through the UVA bookstore and through many other places, and it should be shipping soon. Over the next several weeks, we're going to be holding 3 different panels with some of the contributors to the book and others, looking back at the 2020 election and forward to the 2022 election and beyond. Tonight is the first of those events. The second will be 2 weeks from tonight, April 8th, entitled Taking Stock, the Societal Impact of the 2020 Election. And then the third will be 3 weeks from tonight, also at 6:30, April 15th. That'll be voters of color in the 2020 election. We'll have more information about these panels and future issues of Sabados Crystal Ball and also on our website, centerforpolitics.org. Also, this coming Tuesday at 11 a.m., Center for Politics is going to continue its longstanding ambassador series with a conversation with the Greek ambassador to the United States. That's another free event you could tune into if you'd like. More information is available at centerforpolitics.org. Finally, if you'd like to support the work of the Center for Politics, and we appreciate everyone who does, of course, you can make a donation via text. Simply text civility, the word civility, to 41444. With that, I'd like to introduce our 3 panelists. All great friends of the Center for Politics and people who have participated in our post-election books in the past. It's a project we do every 2 years, as soon as we can after big national elections. First, let me introduce Theodore Johnson. Ted is a senior fellow and director of the Fellows Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. He is an expert on Black political behavior, and he wrote about Black voters in A Return to Normalcy, our 2020 book. And he specifically looked at the gender gap amongst Black voters. Ted is also going to be moderating that third panel on April 15th, so we thank him in advance for that. He also has a book of his own coming out in June, When the Stars Begin to Fall, Overcoming Racism and Renewing the Promise of America. That's coming out in June. Ted, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Always fun to be here.
Next, we have Diana Owen. She is a political science professor at Georgetown, and she is an expert on the media, and she's written a chapter about how the media has covered the election in several past editions of our post-election books, including in 2020. And her chapter not only gets into how the media covers the election, but also a lot of the social media developments, which there's a ton of new stuff basically every 2 years that emerges in our elections. And in fact, one of the things we might talk about a little bit later is whether the president himself might want to start a new social network for himself because he got banned from the one that he previously preferred in Twitter. So Dinah, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks so much, Kyle.
And finally, Sean Trendy is a senior elections analyst at Rookler Politics. And he wrote a chapter in our book which assesses whether the experience of Donald Trump was worth it electorally for Republicans, which is another topic we're going to get into tonight. And Sean, thanks for coming. Always good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I mentioned the term a return to normalcy at the start here. And I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit, but also kind of look at what was arguably one of the most abnormal events in recent times, the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. And just as, obviously the timetable for our book is way down the list of important things going on in the world. But this is a book we put together pretty quickly after the election, and right around the time of when the Electoral College certification happened was the time where people need to turn their chapters. And of course, usually there's not a whole lot of drama with that. But unfortunately, there really was this time, and it was sort of up to some of the authors on the fly to try to determine what the long-term implications might be of January 6th, which is something obviously we're still dealing with now, and people are going to be thinking about for a long time. So we're I don't know, we're a little less than 3 months from that event happening. Obviously, the president was impeached but not convicted. The former president was impeached but not convicted over it. What do you all think are the long-term ramifications from what happened on January 6th? Ted, maybe I'll start with you, and then others can chime in.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think the first thing is America is still very much a place that puts a lot of trust in its leaders. So much so, and because of the complexity of politics, that the bumper sticker version of what's going on in the world that often is offered by politicians becomes a doctrine by which people conduct themselves and how they interact with one another. And so I thought we saw the power of rhetoric. And this is something that President Trump was expert at from the time he was campaigning through his presidency, using words and appeals for political purposes and to sort of rally his supporters. But we also saw that when unrestrained, that rhetoric can be violent and can lead to disruption not only of our society, but of our democracy and the things that the peaceful transfer of power that we treasure so much and that we really point to whenever anyone criticizes our democracy. We point to that totem as an example of what democracy should look like. So one, there's the influence of leadership, the power of rhetoric. But I think the thing that is going to linger is the relatively weak response by members of Congress to what happened on the Capitol. Certainly the FBI has prosecuted folks and gone after those they could find on social media, but it seemed like within a couple of days it was politics as normal on the Hill, and that is, and in my view, it's unacceptable and sort of opens the door for future iterations of these kinds of disruptions happening again, because the penalties collectively and politically, from a partisan perspective, weren't severe enough to prevent the sort of leadership, to encourage the sort of leadership that's necessary and prevent the sort of rhetoric that led to January 6th in the first place.
Diana, you go ahead if you want to respond to that and the question.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Ted says, and particularly the fact of the lack of accountability on the part of congressional leaders. And I feel that the long-term ramifications might be under the radar, because right now they don't seem to be as severe, as lasting as they deserve to be. We're already seeing the insurrection fade from public memory. It's fading from media attention. I think after the media exhausted all of the, kind of their typical, their stock storylines, who's involved, the conspiracy theories, Trump heroes, they largely moved on. They were showing, they showed the same kinds of film until the public became exhausted with it. They didn't really tell the story about the true level of the assault on the foundations of our democracy, and try, as my Congressman Jamie Raskin and others did, to try to emphasize and explain the constitutional issues and the threat to the foundations of our democracy. These things are complicated. And as someone who studies the media, I was very disappointed in the way that the press, kind of glossed over these things and played up the sensational issues just like they always do. And to me, this basically allowed them to kind of move on. This is just one more to them in a series of debacles and tragedies and violent actions that they've been covering. And I think the exhaustion among audiences kind of has affected the ability of the press to really cover these kinds of things and the severity of the consequences as they should.
Sean, go ahead. But also, you sort of in your own chapter for our book, you kind of thought that maybe you thought something before January 6th and then thought something maybe a little bit different after January 6th. So about kind of the whole Trump experience for Republicans.
Yeah, as you know, I'm someone who's pretty fastidious about deadlines, and my deadline was, as you said, January 6th. And so trying to assess the Trump presidency, all of a sudden, like this this chapter that I had written looked to be very obsolete on January 6th. So you're kind enough to give me an extension. I think
got a couple of hall passes.
Yeah, that was, a tragedy on a minor scale, given what was going on, but still, that was something from a writer's perspective. Look, I think if you look back to 1993, there was a bomb that went off in the bottom of the World Trade Center. It was actually a near miss. If the truck had been parked a few spaces over, there is speculation, at least, that it could have taken out one of the pillars and the tower would have fallen then. And at the time, it was a tragedy. A few people died, but we kind of wiped our brow and moved on. And of course, it wasn't just a wipe your brow and move on. It was a precursor of something that would happen 8 years later. So I think, on the other hand, there are near misses that just turn out to be near misses. And this was a near miss. If it had gone a little bit differently, we may well have had dead members of Congress. So I think, the book still needs to be, the jury's still out on what the long-term ramifications are. I do think it's real easy to wipe your brow and move on, but that is a very risky move, given the potential severity of things just going a little bit differently.
And just sort of, Sean, I'm going to address this to you again, and then I'll ask the others to weigh in. But about the Republicans came out of the Trump presidency, technically, not holding any branches of Congress, and obviously not holding the White House, although Congress is very closely contested. As you note in the chapter, though, that the sort of losses that happened over the course of the Trump presidency are pretty comparable to the sort of partisan losses that most presidents see over the course of their presidency. Just today, there was a story in Politico about the various candidates for the open Ohio Senate seat almost having to kind of go audition for Trump a couple nights ago for his endorsement. Trump still seems like a really central figure in the party. So how do you sort of evaluate Trump's place? And again, I want to get the others in on this one too.
Yeah, so I think the only way to do this is to do the analysis, at least from an electoral perspective, is to do the analysis pre-January 6th and then have a huge asterisk out there. Like, from a moral perspective, it's a very different evaluation, and we don't know what the long-term consequences for the party are going to be. Pre-January, which is how I resolved it in the chapter. Pre-January 6th, look, if you had told me that there was going to be a presidential election where GDP collapsed 30% in the second quarter, which political science uniformly says is like the quarter, and 500,000 Americans were going to die, and the president was going to speculate about injecting people with disinfectant to try to cure the disease in a press conference, I'd have told you his party was going to get wiped out, that you would have like 30 Senate seats and 10 House seats, and he would get 5 votes. And that's not what happened. Despite a really catastrophic environment, Republicans gained seats in the House and did when no one's thought they would, and did better in the Senate than I think people expected. And Trump's loss, while substantial in the popular vote, was about 20,000 votes going one way or the other in 3 key states. So, from an electoral perspective, he just wasn't the debacle that I expected. In 2016 he'd be a debacle, and obviously wasn't. I thought in 2018 it would be really bad, and it was, but then in 2020 it was better than I expected. Again, this is putting a big asterisk about the moral evaluation of his presidency and the potential that January 6th is going to have reverberations down the road for the party.
Ted, do you have any reaction to that?
No, I agree. Look, it is a testament to just how partisan we have become. And by partisan, I mean how team sportsy our allegiances and loyalties to parties have become. Look, I'm in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. I know diehard Washington football team fans, despite who the owner is at any given point in time, despite who the starting quarterbacks are, they lose, they haven't been to the playoffs, haven't won a Super Bowl in decades, and every Sunday, they're right back hoping their team will win. And so when that sort of attitude comes into our politics, then the economy, a global pandemic, a summer of racial justice protests after the killing of George Floyd doesn't move the needle much because people are sticking with their teams. in a election that had the highest voter turnout in 120 years, it was still basically decided by 43,000 votes over 3 states. And so what this means is that the primaries become all that more important, and Trump has a hold on the most passionate parts of the Republican Party, which also tend to be the parts that show up the most during primaries, which means that appealing to him to get through the primary system is the name of the game, because once you enter the general, either for a state seat, a Senate seat, or in the presidential election, people are going to stick with their team despite the socioeconomic factors and conditions that surround the election.
Diana, do you have any thoughts on Trump's current role in the Republican Party? And then I have a follow-up question for you.
Yeah, I think that his current role is, as Ted and Sean have said, he's still important. He still has a base of loyal followers. But what I'm interested in speculating in is, or how long is that going to last? He's been out of the limelight for a while, having lost his voice on Twitter. He almost seems to have disappeared. He went to New York, nobody knew, and it's almost like automatic that he lost his real presence and his voice. And there actually are, some of the people who voted for him are starting to say, well, Biden's getting it done with COVID. Maybe we should give him a chance. So I'm just wondering about the long-term implications of his power over the party. And he's also left the party in terrible shape. It's very fragmented, and he's not loyal to anyone. So it's hard to trust him. And I think over time, and maybe not such a long time, the Trump effect might really dissipate quite a bit.
The follow-up is, and it's sort of related to what you're talking about, the president there's been some recent reporting that he wants to sort of maybe co-opt a current social media platform to sort of take the place of Twitter or create his own, based on, your understanding of how the, social media networks emerged and whatnot and Trump's power. Like, do you think he could do that, and get the kind of audience that he was getting from Twitter?
Well, I think that he has pretty grand plans, but I'm not so sure he'll be able to execute them. I think he's underestimating what it really takes to establish a successful social network. It does take a lot of money. He probably will be able to raise that. But besides that, you have to draw an audience, and you have to find an audience that'll, kind of be able to locate you, be able to, kind of sustain your mouthpiece there. And so I think I'm not so sure that he's going to be able to kind of move people over to any kind of a new social network that he would develop in the numbers that he would need to really sustain it and become powerful. But what I do think could happen is he could establish this network, and he starts tweeting out or posting again, and he attracts the attention of the mainstream press. And they amplify this message. And all of a sudden, now people are finding him there. And it doesn't matter, because what he says then gets broadcast very widely and becomes, again, a big part of the national debate. And I'd say one thing that's happened during the Biden administration is that almost immediately the news, as some of my friends said, became boring again. And, I think the media aren't too happy about that. And it was very easy to, report on, if you're, kind of cable news, you pick up one of his tweets, it's caustic, it's horrible, you say that, you bring on some people and you say that. It doesn't take much in the way of resources to, get that, to get into play. And then your audience increases and you see these record numbers of people tuning into your shows. So I actually think there's a 50-50 chance of him pulling this off, not necessarily because, if he set up this network on his own and he's able to attract a lot of people, but because I feel that the mainstream press might, kind of basically get in bed with him in a way. Not that they intentionally will do that, but that it's something that will draw more audiences to their channels.
Sean and then Ted, I want to get your reaction to that, and also just to sort of ask, obviously, if you did a poll today, say, hey, who should asking Republicans who should the nominee be in 2024? Trump's going to finish, first in polls like that, and has. But Diana suggests that maybe there's a possibility that over time maybe he fades from attention, even if he wants to run again, maybe he wouldn't win. Do you, Sean? Do you see him fading, or do you still see him as having kind of this kind of ironclad grip on the party and more importantly, I guess it's voters.
Yeah, on his social media, Slate Star Codex is kind of a controversial blog in a lot of ways. But one line from one of the pieces really stood out to me, talking about setting up these alternate sites. This was like 5 years ago, saying, if you set up an alternate site to try to escape a witch hunt, even if you're right about it, you're going to end up with 5 principled libertarians and about 1 billion witches on the site. And I think that's the problem that Trump will run into with this, is that the people who are going to join that site are going to be the most extreme, the people on the right who have driven me nuts on Twitter for the last 4 years. And then you'll have like centrist Republicans and liberals and then Red Rose Twitter on Twitter, making that still kind of a centrist site. It's in a lot of ways self-alienating. I think, though, there's a lot of truth to the idea that, Trump draws ratings, and that is going to tempt a lot of mainstream media sources who've seen declining ratings to try to amplify this site. And even if it is, I mean, in a way for them, it's even better if it turns out to have 5 billion witches, because that's more eyes on the television screen to hear what the witches are saying. So it's a tough situation. The question about 2024, I was actually kind of surprised. There have been a couple polls, and Trump isn't as dominant in the polls for the 2024 nomination as I'd expected. I mean, he's leading, but it's not like he's getting 70 or 80% of the vote, which suggests that there's at least an openness to exploring alternatives. Now, there's still a lot, we don't know if he's going to be indicted in New York. We don't know if he would run his campaign from federal prison and possibly win. We don't know. I mean, after the last 4 years, I'm just like, who knows? There's a lot that can happen, but I am just at this early stage, I'm surprised by how much openness there has been to alternates, at least in the polls. We'll see how things play out.
Ted, what do you think about Trump's standing in the GOP right now?
Yeah, I think right now he's just he's the cosigner on helping people get through their primary processes, sort of clear the field of challengers, or at least try to stand out. What I will be interested to see, especially for 2024, is how big the field is. How many Republicans will be willing to challenge him for the nomination? That will be, to me, that is the answer lies there. In 2015 into 16, there were a lot of people running for the presidency, and on the Republican side, and Trump was able to sort of corner the market on pluralities across the country until enough of them got out that they turned into majorities. The other thing that happened in 2016 was that turnout was incredibly high for Republican primaries. So you were seeing increases from 2016 over 2012 from 50 to 100% more people participating in Republican primaries. Most of those new folks were disengaged voters that were excited by the Trump magic and the energy. I don't know. That's really, really hard to duplicate again. And 2020, I think, showed some of that. But even exciting candidates like President Obama in 2008 wasn't able to excite young voters in 2012 the same way he did in 2008. So in order for Trump to, say, win the nomination in 2024, the field will have to be small and turnout will have to be high. And those two things could very well happen. But if one of those things goes off the rails, then his path will be more complicated than I think the current polling suggests. And I will be really interested to see which Republicans will be willing to mount that challenge should he decide to run. With all the signaling from folks like Nikki Haley and Ted Cruz, who can't cling close enough to Trump in public, it will be interesting to see if they're willing to sit out another 4 years if Trump runs.
Ted, you make a great point in that the very presence of challengers is sort of indicative of how strong someone is. Like in, Biden, for instance, himself, when he got in the race, now he got in a little bit later than most others did in spring of 2019. But, he didn't really scare anyone away. Now he was able to win the nomination anyway, whereas Hillary Clinton in 2016 did scare a lot of people away. And then she sort of turned out to be kind of vulnerable anyway against Bernie Sanders. And so, it's sort of if there's a perception of weakness, then the weakness might manifest itself in who actually decides to do it. Of course, 2024 is a long way away, although we were talking before the panel started about how I think C-SPAN is doing one of its first Road to the White House 2024 with the little tagline or what have you, because there's someone who's speaking in Iowa. So, the churn of the presidential primary process, it never stops. And of course, the current president, Joe Biden, one of the quote news thing that he made at his press conference today was that that he says he plans to run again in 2024. Of course, if he said he wasn't, he would sort of look like a lame duck. So we'll just have to wait and see. But let's turn to Biden a little bit, Diana. And I talked about the kind of the implicit promise of the Biden presidency was sort of let's get back to normal, whatever we think normal is, and also to maybe try to lower the temperature of American politics. Do you have any sense that the temperature has been lowered? And also one thing, and I think Sean mentioned this, that I was going to bring up too, is that, cable news ratings are way down. And part of it's not an election year. But should we interpret that sort of development in any kind of way?
Yeah, well, I just from a personal perspective, Inauguration Day, it almost seemed like someone flipped a switch and there was this kind of collective sense of, sigh of relief, and that things were actually really getting back to normal a lot quicker than I thought. I actually once had the opportunity to talk to Joe Biden, and I was very upset about Donald Trump. This is before he had even decided to run. And he said, don't worry, things will get back to normal much more sooner than you think. And he said, things aren't as terrible as they think, that they can't be turned around. And I didn't believe him at the time. And the jury is still out on that. However, I even thought that, his inauguration, I thought he's waited so long and he's, for this, and he doesn't even get to have a huge audience, but it almost felt like the country was coming together on that day. He had a very nice ceremony and the huge fireworks display, and it was a unifying moment for the country that just kicked off his presidency and got it off on the right foot. I think he's a skilled politician. He knows how to be really patient, and he knows how to back off. And just the fact that today was his first press conference, in-person press conference from the White House, shows that he's not going to cave in and the press was, when are you going to talk to us? When are you going to talk to us? He just kind of has that calmness. I'll be patient. When I'm ready, I'll speak and give you the press conference. His first speech to the nation about COVID, he got tremendous reviews for that. I think just because it was so normal, he laid out a plan and he did it systematically, and he didn't raise his voice or call people names, and he didn't use uncivil dialogue. And, and when he walked away, people that even don't support him had to say, it feels a little bit as if the temperature is definitely coming down. I think that he's starting to experience kind of a tapering off or an end to his honeymoon. There's been a lot of bad press, particularly about the migrant children at the border. And so I think he's going to have some, he's trying to deal with it. I think he tried to deal with it today in his press conference. And so I think that I definitely sense that the temperature is lowering. He's going back to a bygone era, and he might be the right person for the times to be president now if we feel like we need to get back to a time where we have more temperate politics. He seems to be kind of backing away from it himself. He has other people that kind of do the fighting for him in places. So I think that's part of his strategy, is to perceive like he's in charge, but he's also, kind of very steady and is not going to be inflammatory. In terms of the declining cable news viewership in 2021, to me, that is a sign of a return to normalcy. I mean, the cable news audience is back to where it used to be. It's just not being driven by a bunch of tweets. And like I said earlier, some of my friends have said, the news is really boring. I don't even want to watch, but I kind of trust a little bit more that things are being handled properly. And so I don't have to tune in. Now, what this is going to do to the press, I think that's driven some of the really negative coverage of the migrant crisis, which it is a real crisis, but I think the press is looking for some issue to try and get those ratings back up, to Trump levels, but it's not going to happen necessarily with a normal presidency unless, you take some proactive actions.
Sean, what do you think about the temperature of the country now as compared to when Trump was president?
Yeah, I mean, part of the is it a return to normalcy is a defined normalcy. Yes, it's very different in my mind. Good that like the president, I can go to bed knowing that the president isn't going to cancel a state visit to Denmark because the prime minister wouldn't sell him Greenland, right? Like that's good and that's normal, and I have more confidence that way. I think in the bigger picture, I would take things down a couple notches from the previous comments. I think, Biden came in with a decent job approval rating, but in the context of honeymoons, it was relatively low. And his net job approval has fallen in half since the beginning of his term. Now, it's still good. It's better than Trump's ever was. It was plus 10, but it's not where, say, Obama's was at this point. Or even Bush's, who was entering a recession at this point. So I think as far as cooling down the partisan tensions, we'll have to see how it plays out. And a lot's going to depend too on how the legislative agenda goes. Part of Harding's return to normalcy was a response to Wilson's, constant policy innovations, the League of Nations, World War I, also to Teddy Roosevelt, who was kind of in the same vein. And I don't think, at least, so much just depends on how the policy churn goes out. If you end up with a situation where the filibuster is gone and the progressive wish list moves through the center, I think you're going to have through the Senate, you're going to have policy. You'll have the partisan tensions reunite. There won't be the same instability that came from Trump's mannerisms, and that I think is significant. But as far as how normal we are, is just going to depend.
Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, it's and so I kind of go back to where I started, that principled leadership and rhetoric matters. And I think on Inauguration Day, and in the moments leading up to it, the weeks leading up to it, Biden did a solid job of saying the right things to a country that was kind of sick of politics playing out like a soap opera every day. I, for one, am was sick of the doom scrolling. Every time you open Twitter, never knowing what in the world awaited, and what people were saying about it. So, in this way, Biden has become quite a president of the American civil religion, where he sort of prioritizes the rituals, the rhetoric, the principles of America, and in a way that I think is comforting to a country coming off of a pretty cantankerous Trump administration and battles over who were truly patriots and who weren't, and sort of a nation that was sick of the tension and sick of the arguing and looking for those tenets of common ground, those things that we could all agree on, even if we disagree on policy. Now, the hard part about the rhetoric is that soon it meets the rubber meets the road, and that typically happens around policy. And now we're hearing Republicans in Congress hitting Joe Biden on his calls for unity, and then and saying, how can you possibly be for unity when you want to introduce HR 1 and HR 4, these democracy reform bills, into Congress and sign them into law? And so the party that didn't seem all that interested in unity before, it was elections have consequences, so if you don't like what we're doing, win an election, is now saying, unity, I thought this was the principle of the Biden administration. We need some more of that. Let's find some unity, some compromise, instead of doing these wild leftist progressive swings on policy. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of business, but that is the world of politics that we presently live in. And given all of that, I think Biden has done his level best to bring the Boy Scout persona back to the office of the presidency. And I think there is a welcome public for it, but the Boy Scout persona is not popular. And people like it because they can tune out from it and go do other things, which doesn't necessarily help you when it comes to public opinion, and certainly doesn't help the media when it comes to eyeballs on TV sets.
Diana, you brought up immigration, and that was a topic I wanted to hit on in a little more depth, just because that's been, if you think about kind of the first kind of maybe surprise or slightly surprising development that maybe has been sort of a negative for the White House. I guess you probably would say that immigration has been bad, and there's been a lot of coverage. And it's the sort of thing that you could imagine 2 years from now, looking back at the 2022 midterm and saying this ended up being a problem for the Democrats, and it attracted a lot of coverage, et cetera. What do you think about that? I'd love to hear from Sean and Ted on that point as well.
In terms of the media coverage being,
take it however you'd like in terms of where you want to go with it, but that immigration as being a challenge for Biden, and something and an issue that maybe isn't necessarily going to go away anytime soon, because obviously we've been talking about immigration for decades in this country too, and it continues to be something that I think Democrats maybe struggle with a little bit more than Republicans in terms of their kind of message on it.
Yeah, I think it is a real problem for Biden and the media. I mean, clearly he's not been getting very good press on it. There's even been some long form pieces of it on television that were hard hitting, and they try to make them balance, but it doesn't look good. This is something that he said that he would solve, and criticized the Trump administration for a lot during the campaign. And now they go down and they're denied, reporters are denied access to the facilities and supposedly to the information that they need to be able to cover the story properly. And so he's taken a real hit on that. I think today, I didn't get to see the press conference, but from what I was able to pick up about it, he tried to address the immigration problem. I think it's going to persist. It's been brought up to Jen Psaki in her press briefings, that I don't think they've been able to get away from it. I think this is something, because it is such a big problem, and it has had such a lot of attention for kind of years now. And it is something that the Republicans can hit back hard on, and can create controversy that the media can use to kind of, again, get more people tuning in and paying attention to something. I think that it's gotten quite a bit of coverage, whether it's fair or not entirely. I'm not sure about that. It is definitely a problem that has to be addressed. I guess it's something they didn't anticipate, the Biden administration, in this sense. So I think they're still trying to work out how to deal with it and manage it from a press perspective. And I'm not sure they're being all that successful at it. But at the same time, there's other issues the press could focus on. We've had these mass shootings, and they haven't been tuning as much into those issues of gun control and other things as they could have been.
Sean, there's a dynamic in public opinion that basically, I think you're certainly familiar with, that when there's a Republican in the White House, all of a sudden liberal ideas maybe sometimes get a little bit more popular, and then there's a Democrat in the White House, conservative ideas get a little bit more popular. I kind of wonder, you think it's possible maybe we see something like that on immigration, whereas that it seemed like the president didn't necessarily get the kind of traction out of Build the Wall and the migrant caravan and those sorts of things, particularly in the 2018 midterm, the former president, meaning Trump. But now that Biden's in the White House, that maybe the public maybe skews a little bit more conservative on issues like immigration.
Yeah, I mean, thermostatic response is one of those things that goes back 70 years in American politics. You see it in the polls from Obama's first term, where you got, I think for the first time in Gallup's polling, a plurality of people said they didn't think that healthcare was a job for the federal government. And then when Trump came in, it swung, heavily the other way. And I think it's just part of the contrarian nature of Americans. It's part of the same reason that the president's party almost always suffers midterm losses going back to the 1870s. We just, we have a skepticism of the power that's invested in the president. So something like the border crisis just plays different when you have a Democrat in the White House than when you have a Republican. It's a nice reminder of how events can intervene on best laid plans. I think this is a classic example when we were talking in the last question about how normalcy goes. It's this crisis on the border and how Biden handles it is going to have implications for when the Senate takes up immigration reform with or without the filibuster. So, there's just so many things that can go wrong in a presidency and often do. But it's a young administration, so we'll see how it handles this.
Ted, if you have any points you want to make on immigration, go ahead. But then I also wanted to follow up, and Sean mentioned the kind of maybe the shortened timetable for the Biden presidency is you look at it 2022, maybe they lose the House, the Senate, maybe their opportunities for legislative action go away. And you wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about some of the voting rights bills that the Democrats are trying to get through now the Senate. You specifically talked about Mitt Romney as maybe as a person who might be amenable to some of those things. But it seems like if the Democrats want to act on those sorts of things, they're probably going to have to act now, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. Right. So on immigration, again, I mean, when we are as hyper-partisan as we are, what is the incentive for the party that's out of power to cooperate with the party that's in power to deliver on a reform that all Americans want? Because all you do is make the party in power look like the strong, capable government party that can govern appropriately and accomplish something that you couldn't get done when you were in power. So immigration reform falls there. We're still waiting on Infrastructure Week, and it's hard to come by a decade ago. It was hard to come by 5 years ago, and it's going to be hard to come by under Biden because the party that doesn't hold the keys to the White House and the chambers of Congress is going to help deliver a major victory to the party in power, and there's just no. There's a moral incentive to do so. There's like a principled reason to do so, but from a political standpoint, if you're thinking specifically about power and control of the branches of government, then stalling seems to be the more politically expedient tactic. And so, for those reasons, absent a true calamity, I just don't think we're going to see much progress from this Congress on anything major that needs to happen. So on the voting rights stuff, I think this falls in that bucket. Look, the voter fraud is not a problem in the United States. Again, we just came out of an election with the highest turnout in 120 years, and we are seeing bills being proposed in state assemblies across the country, some looking to expand access to the ballot further, others looking to restrict it. And this is an argument that should not be as partisan and as contentious as it is. When the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was reauthorized under Reagan, it was something like 85-8 that it was supported. Under Bush, it was 98-0. The voting rights used to not be a partisan issue. It used to be widely accepted and understood that making it more making it easier for folks to vote is a good thing for democracy. And suddenly, we're in this position after the highest turnout in over a century that we need to put some more regulations and controls on registration and voting days and voting locations and IDs and all of these things. So I long for the days of principled progressives and principled conservatives coming together and recognizing that voting is a good thing for American citizens to do. And I don't think we're in those days anymore. And as such, I don't suspect we're going to see a ton of compromise on this. The op-ed, and this is the last thing I'll say, kind of holds out hope that the principled wing of the Republican Party may not agree with everything that's in HR 1, HR 4, S1, but will find the things that are not objectionable, like making it easier for folks to vote and protecting access to the ballot, and support those things, and in the hopes that we can find a cross-ideological agreement on these principles, even if we can't find a bipartisan one that would match what we saw under previous Republican presidents.
Let me talking about the filibuster here a little bit, and unless, I guess it's possible that if the filibuster were to stay in place, that basically we may have already seen the major milestone piece of legislation from this, for Biden's first 2 years on this big COVID relief bill, which of course had a bunch of other stuff in it. But of course, if the Democrats were to do away with the filibuster, you could imagine that. I want to direct this to Diana first, that sometimes the problem that the president's party has in the midterm is that the public decides that they've gone too far, that the president's party has gone too far, and that they want to check. And I would think that Republicans could very easily argue that that they really need to be a check on the White House if in fact the filibuster was done away with. That would seem to be a potent kind of argument in a midterm, and one that I think they could probably communicate.
Yeah, I think they could. The filibuster is a very complex issue, though, and that's something that I think, might preclude it from being as impactful on the election as it could be. Although the primary electorate is much more informed than kind of the general election electorate, I guess, in some ways. But I don't think a lot of the public really understands the filibuster, its importance. And so I'm not sure how much it can play as an election issue. Now, it can be framed in a way that might be saleable. But I think that, if you ask a person on the street, what is the filibuster and what's this argument about? I don't think too many people would be able to tell you. So I think that kind of undercuts its potential as a real campaign issue. But on your other point about, kind of acting as a check, it's been a while so that now he doesn't have divided government. We're used to divided government being a check. That might be something that could also, kind of sell and be a point that Republicans could use. We've got to go back to having more of a check on the presidency.
Sean, you brought up the midterm dynamic. We're talking about, check on the White House and whatnot. You look at it's a tied 50-50 Senate, and the Democrats have a 222 to 213 majority in the House, which means that the Republicans, at full strength, the Republicans would only have to flip 5 seats. I mean, is it reasonable to look at 2022 and say, boy, the Republicans really should win both the House and the Senate, maybe at least just the House? What do you think about? What's your kind of early outlook on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little more bullish on Democrats than that. If you look, so for the House, I think their majority's in trouble. I think if HR1, if the Independent Redistricting Commission somehow gets through, you would have to revise that. But just from control of redistricting, Republicans can probably take control of the House. Even if you had HR1 go into effect, like you said, the tendency is for the party in power to lose seats unless you have a president with a 65% plus job approval like Clinton in 98 or Bush in 2002 or FDR presumably in 1934. The Senate's a little more complicated because, as we know, not all the senators are up at the same time. And if you look at the Senate map, it's not that bad for Democrats. Their vulnerabilities are going to be Georgia, Arizona, New Hampshire, maybe Nevada, and Republicans have some vulnerabilities in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. So a lot's going to just depend on how this Biden presidency goes out. If he goes into it with a 52, 53% job approval like he has today, I think Democrats would have a very good chance of holding and maybe even picking up seats in the Senate. If he goes into it like the presidents have in the last 4 midterm elections with a job approval in the mid to low 40s, it's going to, Democrats will lose the Senate.
Ted, any feel for anything you're looking for 2022 midterm?
I think the biggest thing is probably every race in the House and the ones that are up in the Senate, the parties are going to try to characterize each other based on the superlative characters in their party. And so every House race is going to be AOC versus Trump, McConnell. And then the public will have to decide, do I want a puppet Biden controlled by these young socialist women, or am I willing to accept, sort of the old guard, cutting taxes and putting judges in place and being conservative on a range of social issues? And there won't be problem being solved in any of those discussions, but it will be trying to push the caricatures of the people running to the polls of their party, and then having people vote against the poll instead of in support of a particular candidate. So I think the open question here is whether or not on the Republican side, for example, do you get more of the Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of House candidate, which I think would be bad for Republican chances, or do you get, some of the young, fresh veterans who are willing to sort of not talk down to Trump, but toe the party line in large measure. And that version of the Republican Party that still has Trump as a standard bearer could fare pretty well. So we'll see. I think the type of candidates that are promoted in the primaries will say lots about the sort of Congress we'll see after the next set of midterms.
Dan, any thoughts on the midterm? And also, Ted makes an interesting point about kind of the definition of the parties by their, I guess, maybe most extreme members. And I think that's probably something that plays out in the press, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's something that plays out a lot in the press, because again, that can create the dramatic, sensational kinds of coverage that, the press is craving in order to get, more eyeballs on the television. So I agree. I think that this is the way that, when you have highly polarized parties and candidates that are going to, kind of play into that, and it seems to be working with the electorate, I think that that's going to be really a big factor. And I agree that the primaries are going to be something to watch, because that's going to make a big difference in terms of what the outcomes are going to be. I mean, it always does, but I think the dynamics of the primaries are going to be particularly interesting this time. And I don't think Biden is really somebody that pulls a lot of people, into the party fold necessarily. I think he himself, he's standing on his own as a president, but I'm not sure he's somebody that is, a big magnet for people to join the party and get on board with other candidates. So
it is interesting with Biden in that, I would think that during 2022, to Ted's point, you're going to see a lot more Pelosi, Ocasio-Cortez, and maybe there's something to be said about Biden is an old white guy basically, and he doesn't maybe animate people the way that women or people of color do, or et cetera. But that maybe the Democrats could benefit just because Biden himself. Republicans have, to me, I guess, and I'd be curious for any thoughts from the panel on this, that Biden himself doesn't seem to animate the opposition maybe quite as much as a Hillary Clinton or a Barack Obama. Sean, any thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, Biden has always had two major things going for him. I mean, that he's kind of boring, and he is always been he's a Democrat. We haven't had a president like him in a very long time. A lot of presidents were defined by their personal brands. Certainly Obama, W to a degree, certainly Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan. Joe Biden is a Democrat, and there isn't a lot of personal brand there. Wherever the center of the Democratic Party has been over his career has tended to be where he wound up. And so it's very difficult to turn him. And on top of that, he's kind of a goofy old guy, and Republicans tried to make hay with that. But it ultimately didn't hunt. I think people kind of liked his grandfatherly, missteps and whatnot. So it's difficult to turn him into a boogeyman. Where I think the Democrat, I think a lot. I don't think, to get back to an earlier conversation, I don't think nuking the filibuster anyone would care about because it's inside baseball. The question then, though, becomes like, what comes next? If it does begin to be this like giant march that I think a lot of progressives are hoping for, of bills going through the House and the Senate, suddenly you have a situation where I think the right is very animated, and it's going to be like the Obamacare fight in 2010 all over again, which some of it had something to do with what was actually in the bill, but a lot of it did not. And so again, we just it's early in the presidency. We'll have to see, but I do think there's a chance that Biden could be undefined. Now, I also tend to think that even with the filibuster gone, suddenly the stakes on a lot of these votes that in the past have previously been freebies for vulnerable members of the House and even in the Senate, because it wasn't going to be law, suddenly the stakes rise, and getting things through these narrow majorities are going to become tougher.
Yeah, I mean, some people mentioned, Joe Manchin then would, sort of the key vote in for the Senate Democrats, but he may actually like the filibuster in the sense that he doesn't actually then have to actually cast votes on the most contentious things, and there may be other Democratic members of the Senate too, who are like that, like Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona. We're almost out of time here, and so I just want to offer Ted or Diana, if you had any sort of final thoughts on Biden's image right now, or anything else we should sort of be looking forward to for the political landscape moving forward here.
Yeah, I would just say, I wonder how much this Biden presidency will be looked back on like Carter's presidency, in a nation that sort of is coming off a presidency that kind of went off the rails, and we're looking to be sort of lulled back into a sense of normalcy, and not have to be consumed with what the executive was doing with executive powers. And but that was good for a time until something new and shiny and exciting, a charismatic figure came on, and it wasn't so much a policy thing. I mean, sure, there was like Iran and there was a recession, et cetera. But I think it was okay. We've got a taste of the boring. We sort of got the taste of Nixon out of our mouth. Now we're ready to get rolling again. And I wonder if Biden is going to, they can't pin Biden with the same labels they pinned on Carter, but he may be so successful in giving people a sense that government is just doing what it used to do before Trump, that people's attention will start looking elsewhere. I don't know that would look back to another term of Trump. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But if there's a charismatic figure that comes on the scene that that would seem like it can put a fire underneath the normalcy that we are now beginning to sense under Biden, then I think there's a chance that Biden will be sort of the medicine we had to take in order to get back to rock and roll. But we'll see. And I think a lot of what Biden is able to do from a policy perspective in the response to the pandemic and continuing the economy to recover will depend a lot on just what America's appetite is for something different after 4 years of him.
I guess I'd like to pick up a little bit. I agree with Ted. And I also think that right now we're still in the midst of COVID. We're looking for a leader who's going to be reassuring, who seems to have a plan, who can express that plan in a way that, the public can comprehend. And there's actual results. People are getting, vaccinated. The number of cases it's sort of dropping. And so he's very reassuring now. But the COVID pandemic is going to be over. Well, and he's still going to have a lot more of his presidency left. And so kind of in keeping with what Ted was saying, okay, we're now past this big crisis that's affected the whole country. And we're in this period of now kind of, okay, we're back to kind of normal life and as it will be post-COVID. And where do we go from there? And I just want to also say that young people turned out to vote in record numbers this time. And they voted for Biden in large part because they felt, okay, he's the better alternative. And some of them actually came to like him a bit, but that's not where they're headed. They're looking for something younger, brighter, more exciting, more diverse in that role as president. And so, and I think they're activated, they're getting to the media aspect of this. Young people are getting exposed to politics either intentionally or accidentally through social media at a much earlier age than they ever were before. And that's tuning them into the things that they need and want out of their government and their leaders. And I think that that's going to make a big difference, even in a short period of time, over the types of leaders that are going to make it.
Well, thank you so much to our great panel. We're out of time, and again, the book is A Return to Normalcy, and available for pre-order and almost anywhere you look for books. And we're going to be doing another one of these panels 2 weeks from tonight. So I hope you will join us then. And again, thanks for tuning in.